The sacred covenant flooded back into the assembled delegates like water filling a broken dam. Sarah watched as relief washed over their features, their postures straightening as the familiar certainty returned to their minds. But she could also see something new in their expressions, a haunted quality, as if they had glimpsed something they wished they could forget. The Veltar prosecutor was the first to speak after the Covenant's return, his mercury form now stable but subdued. "Honored arbiter," he said, his melodious voice lacking its earlier confidence. We experienced what you described. The uncertainty, the doubt, the inability to trust in the truth of spoken words. It was... He paused, searching for words that could express the experience. It was like being blind in a universe we had always seen clearly. The Zephyrian delegate's crystalline structure chimed softly as it shifted position. The humans lived their entire existence in that state of uncertainty. Yet they built a civilization. They created art, literature, philosophy, science, all without the certainty we take for granted. How is such a thing possible? Sarah felt the weight of their attention settling on her again, but this time it was different. Where before there had been suspicion and disgust, now there was something approaching awe, mixed with a healthy dose of fear. "We had to," she said simply. "When you can't trust that someone is telling the truth just by feeling it, you have to find other ways to build trust. When you can't sense someone's intentions directly, you have to judge them by their actions over time. It made us careful, skeptical, but also resilient." The Council Prime's ethereal form pulsed with thoughtful energy. "Captain Chen, your species' trial was intended to determine whether humans could be integrated into galactic society. Given the Arbiter's revelations, it appears the question should have been whether galactic society is ready to integrate with humans." The massive Korath representative nodded slowly, his bear-like features creased with newfound understanding. "In our military exchanges, we were disturbed by the humans' constant discussion of contingency plans and tactical alternatives. We interpreted this as evidence of aggressive intent. But now I realize they were simply thinking the way they always think, preparing for multiple possibilities because they cannot sense which one is most likely to occur." "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "When we plan for war while working for peace, it's not because we want conflict. It's because we've learned that hope for the best while preparing for the worst is the only way to survive in an uncertain universe." The Arbiter's crystalline form began to dim slightly, but its voice remained strong. "The integration of humanity into galactic society will require unprecedented changes in how both sides approach truth, communication, and cooperation. The humans must learn to understand species that have never experienced doubt. The Covenant-connected species must learn to function with beings who verify truth through evidence rather than emotion." A new voice spoke from the assembly, a delegate Sarah had not heard before. The speaker was a representative of the Mind Weavers, a species known for their powerful psychic abilities and their role in maintaining the sacred covenant itself. "Honored arbiter," the Mind Weaver said, its voice resonating with harmonic overtones that spoke of deep concern. "What you describe would require fundamental changes in how we conduct trade, diplomacy, and law. Our entire legal system is based on the assumption that truth can be directly sensed. Our economic structures depend on the certainty that contracts reflect genuine intent. How can we possibly adapt?" The Arbiter's attention turned to the Mind Weaver with something approaching approval. "An excellent question. Captain Chen, how would your species suggest modifying galactic institutions to accommodate both Covenant-dependent and Covenant-independent methods of verification?" Sarah had been thinking about this very question during the long days of her trial. "We would start small," she said. pilot programs where human and alien negotiators work together on trade agreements, using both psychic verification and written documentation. Scientific collaborations where human skepticism and alien intuition complement each other. Cultural exchange programs where both sides learn to communicate across the gap. She gestured toward the courtroom's recording systems. You already have some of the infrastructure in place. Your legal proceedings are recorded, your trade agreements are documented. The difference would be learning to use these tools not just for reference, but as primary methods of verification. The Veltar prosecutor's form rippled with what Sarah now recognized as thoughtful consideration rather than agitation. But surely the process would be inefficient compared to our current methods. Why would we voluntarily adopt more cumbersome systems? Because efficiency built on a failing foundation is ultimately useless, the arbiter replied before Sarah could respond. The sacred covenant is not just weakening, it is becoming increasingly unreliable. Have you not noticed that negotiations with distant species require more effort than they once did? That long-range psychic communication sometimes fails without explanation. That younger generations report difficulty sensing truth in complex or emotionally charged situations. An uncomfortable silence fell over the assembly. Clearly, many of the delegates had noticed these issues, but had not connected them to a larger pattern of decline. The Mindweaver delegates' harmonic tones grew more complex, expressing deep disturbance. You speak of the covenant as if it were a machine that could break down. But it is the fundamental force that connects all sapient life in the galaxy. It cannot simply fail. It is not a natural force, the arbiter corrected. It is a construct created by the predecessor civilization to enable cooperation among their scattered colonies. Like all artificial constructs, it has a limited operational lifespan. The predecessors knew this, which is why they seeded the galaxy with species like humanity, backups that could maintain civilization without relying on psychic bonds. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. You're saying humanity was deliberately created to be different? That we're some kind of fail-safe mechanism? Not created, the arbiter clarified, but guided. The predecessors identified worlds where intelligent life was developing without psychic abilities and encouraged their growth. They ensured that such species would eventually develop the tools needed to maintain technological civilization without the covenant. The implications of this revelation hit the courtroom like a physical blow. The Zephyrian delegate's structure actually cracked with stress as it processed the information. Then, the humans are not primitive newcomers to galactic society, it clicked slowly. They are the inheritors the predecessors intended to guide us when their gift failed. We're nobody's inheritors, Sarah protested, feeling overwhelmed by the weight of expectations suddenly placed on her species. We're just people trying to find our place in a galaxy we barely understand. We make mistakes, we argue among ourselves, we struggle with the same problems of greed and fear and prejudice that every species faces, which is precisely what makes you suitable for the role, the arbiter observed. A perfect species would be poorly equipped to help flawed civilizations adapt to uncertainty. But a species that has learned to thrive despite imperfection, that has developed systems to function even when individuals fail, such a species can teach others how to maintain civilization in the absence of certainty. The Council Prime's ethereal form had been flickering with rapid calculations throughout this exchange. Now it stabilized, radiating a sense of determined resolution. The charges against humanity are dismissed, the Prime announced formally. Furthermore, I propose that this council immediately begin planning for the Great Transition, the period during which galactic civilization must adapt to function without complete reliance on the sacred covenant. The Veltar prosecutor, who had begun this trial demanding humanity's exile, now stood and bowed formally toward Sarah. Captain Chen, On behalf of the Veltar hegemony, I apologize for our misunderstanding of your species' nature. We request permission to send observers to human worlds to learn these verification systems you have developed. Similar offers began pouring in from around the assembly. The Korath wanted to study human military doctrine and strategic planning. The Zephyrians requested cultural exchanges to understand how humans maintained social cohesion without psychic bonds. The Mindweavers asked for joint research programs to explore ways of gradually reducing dependence on the Covenant. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the sudden reversal in attitude, but also deeply moved. "Of course," she said, "we would be honored to share what we know. But remember, we're still learning too. Our methods aren't perfect, and we've made plenty of mistakes throughout our history. Your mistakes may be as valuable as your successes," the Mindweaver delegate observed. "We have never had to learn from failure because the Covenant prevented most forms of serious error. Understanding how your species recovered from wars, economic collapses, and social upheavals could be essential knowledge for our future." The Arbiter's light began to fade more noticeably now, indicating that its participation in these proceedings was drawing to a close. "The path forward will not be easy," it warned. "The transition from Covenant-dependent to Covenant-independent civilization will require generations of careful work. There will be misunderstandings, conflicts, and failures along the way. But there will also be discoveries," Sarah added, feeling a surge of optimism despite the challenges ahead. When species that think differently work together, they often find solutions that neither could develop alone. Humans have already benefited enormously from contact with your civilizations. I think we can all benefit from closer cooperation." The Korath representative rumbled his agreement. "In our military exchanges, the humans taught us concepts we had never considered. They spoke of thinking outside the box and expecting the unexpected. At first, these seemed like signs of paranoid thinking. Now I realize they were teaching us how to prepare for a future where the Covenant cannot guide our decisions." The Prime addressed the full assembly now. "Let this day mark not just the vindication of humanity, but the beginning of a new era for galactic civilization. We will establish the Transition Council with representatives from all member species plus human advisors. We will begin the careful work of adapting our institutions, our laws, our very ways of thinking for a future without psychic certainty." As if in response to the Prime's words, the Arbiter pulsed one final time with brilliant light. "The judgment is complete," it announced. "Humanity is declared not just innocent of crimes against the sacred Covenant, but essential to its continuation. They are hereby granted full membership in galactic society, with all rights and responsibilities thereto." The crystalline pillar began to fade, but its voice remained clear until the very end. "Remember this day when the darkness comes. Remember that truth can exist without certainty, that trust can be built without psychic bonds, and that civilization can survive even when the gods that created it have departed." The Arbiter vanished, leaving behind only a faint afterglow and the profound silence of beings contemplating a fundamentally changed universe. Sarah stood in the center of the courtroom, no longer a prisoner but suddenly bearing the weight of her species' new role in galactic history. Around her, 17 different species began to grapple with the reality that their perfect, eternal civilization was neither perfect nor eternal, and that their salvation might depend on learning from the flawed, struggling, magnificent species they had almost condemned. The trial was over. The real work was just beginning, and for the first time since humans had looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone, Sarah Chen felt certain that they had found not just their place in the galaxy, but their purpose. The age of uncertainty had begun, and humanity would be its guides through the darkness toward whatever new civilization waited on the other side.